them. You have ARC breaks because you have overs and withholds, and then you develop fixed ideas about these people that have opposed you. So there you have, you're the terminal, and you have these opposing terminals, terminal opterm, that forms a GPM. So that's where the mass of the GPM comes from. Now, when a game deteriorates into a game will deteriorate into a game's condition. Now, a game's condition is a game that has deteriorated to the point where you can't win, you can't lose, you can't abandon the game. You've got too much invested in it. The game becomes obsessive and crowds out an awareness of any other games that you might be playing. You become really fixated on this. You see people get fixated on an ex-wife or an ex-girlfriend, or they get fixated on the church, as an op term. And then that precludes them from moving on and actually going back up the line onto their goals and finding new pathways of achieving their goals. They get stuck in an old solution. And so eventually this terminal situation develops enough overs and withholds and problems so that you start to feel like you're the losing side of it. And then, because of the mechanics of the bank, you decide to become the other side of it. You become the critic, or the artist agent, or the public who doesn't want to buy the art or something like that. And so you flip the game and you go on to the other side of the game. You're the cop and now you're the criminal. And then after you've been a criminal and gotten busted by cops enough, then you want to be a cop again. And after you've had enough losses from criminals, you want to be a criminal again. Eventually these two things work their way down over time, and eventually you form what's called a combination terminal, which is you're the criminal with the heart of gold, or you're the dishonest cop. You see, you combine both of those things. And these things, you can find these on any dynamic. And when it deteriorates enough, you find it internally within the person, where the person is in a game's condition with themselves. They are their own op term. When you see people going into self-destructive behavior, they have become their own op term, and they're at war within themselves. See, the whole GPM thing is collapsed into the first dynamic. Now, the whole thing about GPMs is that people on the whole track, these big society games on the whole track have a problem. Let's say you control a whole area of a universe, a whole area of a galaxy, like a whole sector, and then you get invaded by the fourth invaders, and you were there already, but now you're invaded, and now you're at war with them, and somehow you manage to defeat them. Well, you can't kill a Theta, so what can you do with them? Well, you can disable them. That's what they've tried to do. And how do you disable a Theta? You mimic or mirror the mechanics of the physical universe and install in that Theta, through a lot of force and confusion, false ideas, false goals, false solutions, false problems, and this is all called an implant. And LRH then discovered that a lot of GPMs were implanted GPMs and not native GPMs. So here's you have the mechanics of case. You've got this broad GPM accumulation that accumulates. Already said in one place, he says you've got upwards of 23,000 GPMs on your track. And each one of these GPMs could be 100,000 lifetimes long. And you never really can run it out dianetically because it's too massive, it's too complicated. So it'll persist as a mass. Once you get into the implant GPMs, though, these mimic real GPMs, so it becomes very hard to distinguish case-wise between implanted GPMs and case GPMs. It took LRH a long time to figure this out, and he finally figured out one small difference between implant GPMs and actual GPMs. And he realized that implant GPMs have to be taken off the case first before you can really handle a person's own native GPMs. And this led to the discovery of, OT3, and he started researching. He traced a lot of this back to incident 2 in the OT3 implant. Now the OT3 implant is called the R6 bank. And LRH says this is the implant, or this is the bank. The R6 bank is the bank. It's the core of the reactive mind. Well, why is this important? Because the OT3 incident is native to everybody on this planet. Everybody on this planet has or is closely associated with somebody who has this implant. And so this implant forms the basis of group agreement on this planet. When it gets restimulated, it easily forms realities that people can easily go into agreement with, that in fact are destructive or futile. It forms the basis of wars, hostilities, self-destructive dramatizations, and these things repeat themselves over and over and over through history. They manifest in societies, groups, families, and in individuals and cause their downfall and destruction. Because remember, the whole purpose of the R6 bank is to have people disabled. And one of the ways you can disable people is get them to destroy themselves. It's kind of it was a brilliant solution. It didn't work very well. So this OT3 implant was, most of us have done this here, but when you get to it, you'll get to it. And it's a long implant, and it took place there's a whole beginning part of it, and then there's a whole 38-day part of it that's not necessarily GPMs. The first part of it is all false GPMs. Second part of it is all scenarios and dramatizations. It gives you problems that are unsolvable, and it gives you solutions to those problems. So you have a big stimulation of a problem, and you hit the bars and start to drink, or you take heroin, or you gamble, or you have compulsive sex, or something to quote feel good, and that feeling good is always going to be self-destructive because it was suggested by the bank. In fact, it's interesting that in religion, in the Christian church, a sin is defined as something with short-term pleasure and long-term pain, but that is exactly the point of the reactive mind. Say, oh yeah, this is a good solution, but it leads to your downfall. So when the bank gets restimulated, it's easy to get caught up in these dramatizations. And when societies get restimulated and go below 2.0 on the tone scale, they will start to adopt some of these solutions, and they will start to go into agreement with some of these bank principles, and that's why you see the same dramatizations over and over and over again. Now this 38 days was all documented by LRH. In Ron's journal 67, he says he's probably the only person that had ever gone through it, the whole thing. Now he really meant the whole thing, not just the part. You don't get any of this when you do OT3. You get the beginning part of it, which is enough to run it out. You can blow it by running the beginning of it, just like you can run any engram. You get the beginning, it can blow the whole thing. So when you go clear, you've blown your whole OT3 implant. This is good, because once you do that, you can start to deal with the bank that other people have, the banks that you're associated with. See, that is the road to OT. You go clear, and then you deal with your own bank, then you handle the bank of others around you. So, these ideas that are in the 38 days have never been published. LRH did talk about these things, particularly on one of the Class 8 tapes called Tape 10. He talks about some of these more pernicious dramatizations that occur there. He says these guys, they give you a whole tutorial on how to seduce children. He says, nice guys, right? So pedophilia, that's one of the things in the bank. Alcoholism is another thing. Drug addiction. All of these things are available dramatizations in the bank. And it's interesting about pedophilia because when you get these bank dramatizations, they're so heavily charged with people, they go one of two ways. They either see it everywhere where it doesn't exist, or they fail to see it when it's right under their nose. You see, it's so heavily stimulated, their judgment and their ability to perceive it is completely out the window. And also their ability to actually deal with it is quite limited as well. So that's why these things, they end up having a life of their own. So, this research was all done around 1965, 64, 65, when he issued the clearing course. And then 66, 67, he issued OT2 and 3. And this discovery of what was in the bank, and to the degree to which this planet was dramatizing this bank and moving forward in an exact pattern that was being dictated by this OT3 bank. One example is simply the broader and broader use of drugs. LRH says that he could see the planet moving towards one of two things, either a total police state or total annihilation, nuclear war or a police state. And he was concerned about this because he said that in either one of those scenarios, it would be very hard for anybody to actually audit their bank, to actually get enough people out of the bank to create enough islands of sanity so that some of these dramatizations would be tamped down. And I think he did manage to delay it quite a bit, but these things are still moving forward. Even recently, Russia was threatening nuclear war if this and that happened. And, more and more states now are legalizing drugs, and you have more and more drug problems. And yet people think this is a great idea. Well, they think it's a great idea because that's part of the bank. See, the bank doesn't just give you bad ideas. They give you a good justification for these bad ideas. And I'll get into that a little bit more. So everybody's bank is different in some respects. Everybody's had different engrams, accidents, injuries, illnesses, losses. Those elements and aspects are all different from individual to individual. But these core things, the core bank, the R6 bank, it's identical to everybody. So that's an important point. Now, how do these things get carried forward? Well, it's again the mechanism of the winning valence, where when you feel like you've been overwhelmed or defeated by an identity, you will start to take on that identity. So in the R6 bank, as you're going through this implant, if you're not strong enough to at least resist it somehow, you get completely subsumed by it, and you end up going into the valence of the R6 bank. Now, I remember one time Ellery says that a SP is out of valence in the R6 bank. Now, I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I've come to see what exactly he meant. It means that somebody is actually now forwarding in their own actions the purposes of the bank. And this is what a suppressive is, and why a suppressive is a suppressive, and why he does things like promote drugs, promote war, promote conflict. That's the winning valence. So that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. So the logic of the R6 bank is dichotomy thinking. A GPM is dichotomy thinking. You get polarized, something's all good or all bad. One of the things that impressed me when I first read LRH's books back in 1969, when he said the Scientology is based on infinity value logic. You know, one thing's a little bit better than the other and a little bit worse than the other. And you would be able to compare ways of surviving. Tone scale is a gradient. All of the scales, if you notice in Scientology, are all gradient scales. There's no absolute, and he says absolutes are unattainable in the physical universe. This is why, because these are false ideas. You cannot, nothing is completely black or completely white. So one of the ways that the R6 bank works is it gives you it's similar in a way to drugs. You know, you can feel good by taking drugs. Well, so people want to feel good, so they take drugs, but then they get snared into it, and you know, they don't feel good. But in society, why would somebody like Hitler, for example, annihilate an entire population, an entire group of people? It wasn't just Jewish people. He annihilated anybody who was mentally ill. He annihilated Catholics. He annihilated gypsies. Well, he was trying to create a utopia. You know, a lot of these apocalyptic religions and political movements, it isn't just politics, it's religion too. Religions have this idea, Islam has it, you know, Christianity has it, of end times, you know, where there's going to be this big cataclysm, this huge war, battle between good and evil, and out of this chaos and total destruction will emerge a utopia, you know, or the kingdom of God, or anyway. So, in order to create a huge over, you have to have a huge justification, and that's the huge justification. In other words, the motto of radical thinkers on any subject is tear it down and replace it with utopia. Now, I was going to read you something from The Responsibility of Leaders. Now, when LRH was researching this, as I was saying, in 1965, 66, if you notice, you know, you read the policy and you read the ACOBs, there's almost no ethics policy before 1965. There's almost no admin policy before 1965. Well, why is that? Well, because he thought the tech would handle all of these problems. And in fact, the tech is still the senior stable data. But he realized that in order for the tech to work, you have to have a calm and orderly environment to do it in, thus admin tech. And you have to have the person not so engaged in non-survival activities that they're going to only justify it when you try to audit them. So you have to remove them a little bit from what they're doing for them to really see it. You can't see what you're being. You can only see something that you've got some distance. So the identity that you're in, you cannot see it. You have to get exterior to it, then you can see it, then you can evaluate it. So you can't evaluate what you're being. You have to have an exterior terminal to do that, to help you do that, and that's the tech. The auditor keeps his TRs in on you while you inspect your own universe. So anyway, so LRH realized what we're up against. He realized the fate of the planet if we didn't really get busy and really up our game. And so that's when he started to consolidate the org, started to standardize the tech, started to put in admin tech, management tech, ethics tech, and then that developed over many years, along with continuing developing auditing tech. And so one of the things he wrote at the time was this responsibility of leaders about Bolivar. Well, he kind of touches on this. Anyway, he talks about Bolivar freeing these countries from Spanish domination back in the early 1800s. He says the freeing of things is the reverse unstated dramatization, the opposite side of the coin to the slavery enjoined by the mechanisms of the mind. So being a freedom fighter, I mean, it's a worthy identity, but it's also very easy for the freedom fighter to get involved in the games condition with the enslaver. So if you're going to be a freedom fighter, you have to stay exterior to that game or else you get sucked into it. So unless there's something to free men into, the act of freeing is a simple protest of slavery, and no humanoid is free while aberrated in the body's cycle. It is, of course, a gesture to free him politically, and it frees him only into the anarchy of dramatizing his aberrations with no control whatever, and without something to fight exterior and with no exteriorization of his interests. He simply goes mad, noisily or quietly. So you have to create something, a better ideal scene. If you're going to unmock an existing scene, you better have a better ideal scene that's doable, or else the person just, because freedom is a two-edged sword. Any sane game is composed of freedoms, barriers, and worthwhile purposes. For purposes, you can have a game of robbing banks, that's a purpose. But any worthwhile game has worthwhile purposes, acceptable freedoms, and acceptable barriers. We protest games when there's unacceptable freedoms, unacceptable barriers. Some of the time when people, push for freedom, they're just pushing with the freedom to dramatize. And if those dramatizations are destructive, then they're really just simply destroying the game. They're not creating any kind of a new, better game. It says, once as great a wrong as depraving beings, OT3, has been done, there is of course no freedom short of freeing one from the depravity itself, or at least from its most obvious influences into society. By the way, this most obvious influences in the society, these are the stimulators that tend to keep people into these group agreements of the bank. And this is why you already started these social betterment groups, like applied scholastics, so people can study and learn. They're not as susceptible to propaganda or false ideas. Narconon, get people out of drugs. CCHR, to keep people out of this false metal technology. So these are the obvious stimulators in society. So in short, one would have to deaberrate a man before his social structure could be deaberrated. If one lacked the whole ability to free man wholly from his reactive patterns, then one could free man from their stimulators in society at least that. In other words, bring society up tone. If one had the whole of data but lacked the Scientology tech, in other words, if somebody really knew how the bank worked, one would simply use reactive patterns to blow apart the old society and then pick up the pieces in a new pattern. So this is what radicals do, is they use the mechanism of upturn and terminal in order to create increasing polarization, ending up in total war, ending up in a new utopia, except it never happens.
Yeah.
So there's another line. Well, he really nails it here. He says, aberrated man is not capable of supporting in his present state a golden declared age, 3 minutes, given all the tools and wealth of the world. So even though it seems like a nice idea, it's actually impossible. And the motto of the radical thinking is tear it down and replace it with utopia, as I was saying. Now, this is the thinking behind, I mean, this occurs on dynamics too. Why do people blow a marriage, to chase after something that never works, isn't going to work? Why do people try to blow a group apart? If you look at the policies that LRH wrote, I always found it interesting. He says what you're supposed to do, but along with that, it's like, well, here's what you're not supposed to do. Because what happened was he saw all of these potential dramatizations that are encouraged and promoted in the reactive mind that would cause people to act certain ways. And unless you restrain those ways of acting, the group or the family or the individual will inevitably end up in some sort of demise. One example, for example, is the solvency PL. Now, Larry talks about, he mentions the bank in there, and in this time period, when he's talking about the bank, he's talking about the R6 bank, the specific OT3 bank, and he says that an individual will try to spend everything he has and will try to spend everything he can borrow. That's a dramatization in the bank. So unless you counteract that, you end up in bankruptcy. So you see governments trying to do this, you see groups doing it, and there they go. They don't exist anymore. True progress is always built on a gradient system. Society itself is built on thousands of trials and errors. And many of the things that seemed like a good idea back in the 60s have kind of fallen by the wayside. Hippie communes, for one example. There used to be a lot of those. Back in the 1800s, there was a lot of utopian communities that tried to start up, like the Oneida community and things like that. None of those exist anymore. But radical people that are, and you can tell this with people that are prone to extreme emotions are usually prone to extreme solutions and extreme political ideas. So you want to have people running things that are more measured, that can see both sides of something, who can be pan-determined and not, proposing and trying to get group agreement on some sort of radical solution. One of the big tools of people trying to blow apart society is identity politics. Now there's a stable datum in the R6 Bank, he always mentioned this, in Keeping Scientology Working. By the way, Keeping Scientology Working, that policy was written specifically to restrain the dramatizations of the bank. So if you look at all the things you're supposed to do, look at the opposite of that. Those are the things that are promoted by the bank. Anyway, in there it says, is the bank that says that the group is all and the individual is nothing. Identity politics gets its power from the bank idea that in order to have an identity, you have to be part of a group identity. You don't have an individual identity, you have a group identity. Race, nationality, religion, gender, sexual orientation, social background, education, disability, age, profession, political party, these are all categories. Now, I thought it was interesting. The big dichotomies are rich versus poor, black versus white, men versus women, victims versus victimizers. You see this all over the place. One of the things I was thinking, oh, here's the victim-victimizer dichotomy. Here's that GPM in play. And the term is usually used along political lines, but you can see it everywhere. You can see it everywhere in society. Like in high school, it's rampant in high school. What clique are you part of? You're a stoner, or you're a slacker, or you're a brain, or you're a jock, or this is all identity politics, and it's stereotypical thinking. It's lazy thinking because it allows you to not view individuals. So again, it erases your individuality, and so people can see you only as a member of a group. And if you're a member of a group, you're supposed to think a certain way, you're supposed to act a certain way, you're supposed to believe certain things. And if you don't, you get really hammered by that group because they really want to have conformity. Because that's, you're threatening their identity if you're a black conservative, or maybe a feminist who wants to have a family and be a parent, and if you go against the group agreement of whatever group you're part of, you can become very, very much outcast in that group. So the truth is that there are good and bad in every group. Every racial, political, social, economic nationality has its criminal element. They all have their upstats. They have their normal, everybody has their normal, regular people. They all have their criminal class. Unless you look at somebody as an individual and treat them as an individual, then you're just guilty that you're playing right into the hands of identity politics. And then when that goes below 2.0 on the tone scale, then there it starts. When you get keyed in, this is how you think. Now, I thought it was really interesting that Clarence Thomas, there was a Supreme Court ruling recently about affirmative action, and he wrote, in his opinion, he nails this exactly. I was really impressed. He says, allowing discrimination on the basis of race is a call to empower privileged elites who will tell us what is required to level the playing field. They want to level the playing field among castes, classifications that they alone can decide, and after siloing us all into racial castes and pitting those castes against each other, the dissident somehow believes that we will be able at some undefined point to march together into some utopian vision. Social movements that invoke these sorts of rallying cries historically have ended disastrously. Politicians who are low-tone use this divide and conquer strategy. It's a way to gain power, because you have power by controlling groups. See, these groups are interesting. This is a collectivism. You're a collective identity, and you have a leader. Collective identity with one leader. Now that's in the R6 Bank too. That's what it is. It's collectivism. You're clumping people together as an individual with one identity. So negative, and these stereotypes, particularly when negative, are very insidious. They promote and amplify conflict by being a hidden third party which causes normal disagreements to escalate into open warfare. Like when I was doing marriage counseling, I could see this. I was using third-party, doing a third-party check. A lot of times I wasn't getting anywhere. I said, no, there's nobody who's like a couple or something like that. There's nobody who we both know that's talking to both of us. So I started thinking about this. I says, yeah, but there's got to be some kind of third party. What would be the third party? And the third party is generalities about identities. Like, you can't trust women, or men will all cheat. Marriage is a trap. Believe me, when people start spotting these things, charge blows. And then it reduces the problem down to something that can be worked out. Because you can't work out a problem if you don't know what the problem is. The problem is you don't trust men. How can you trust anybody who's a man? How could you ever trust not just this guy here that you're married to? How can you trust anybody? They don't trust me, for example. They think I'm going to take sides and force some solution on them. So, and it's going back to what Ray said. When you have this kind of steam that gets involved in true hatred, you don't usually find that it's hatred of an individual, a specific individual. It's usually hatred of a type of individual. Like a corrupt politician or the police or things like that. So this is this kind of generality, this identity politics opens the door to the kind of polarization that all sort of sane people are objecting to. Especially we see so much of it going on where nothing can get done because everybody's like this, It's a 50-50 society, which means half is against half. So, anyway, so LRH's vision of the future was we had to get this thing going, or else that's where we would end up, police state or destruction. Well, so what do we do about it? How does one stay out of, on an individual or group basis, these patterns of the bank? And, there's auditing tech. The grade chart was designed in order to gradiently take charge off of the GPM case so that the thing could be successfully audited on upper levels. So the simple idea that LRH had is, let's keep the orgs intact, delivering good tech, keep individuals out of harmful dramatizations so that there would be space and time for enough to go free. LRH was trying to bring about, the admin tech is based on a couple of important principles. The main thing it's based on is a meritocracy. And you achieve a meritocracy by managing by statistics. It's the only way to manage that makes any kind of sense. Otherwise, you're managing by opinion or rumor or PR or something like that. That doesn't ever work very well. So that's one way of bringing about sanity, and it brings about sanity because group survival. The survival of society, the group of society of individuals or family, is accomplished by continuously producing it. It has to be produced and created and put there. There's always a lot of work to do and a lot of things to maintain. I mean, if you own a house, you know what it takes to just keep everything functioning. The roof functioning, the lawn cut, the garbage out, food in, the rugs clean. maintaining your body. It's a constant, it takes a lot of work. It doesn't just happen by itself. So when you manage by your statistics, you're giving power and control to people who produce survival. When you give power and influence to people based on their immutable characteristics, such as skin tone or economic status or nationality, you're not flowing power to people who are necessarily producing survival. They may be, they may not be, but there's no guarantee of that. Now, meritocracy, it's not easy. This country was built on the idea of a person could go as far as he could based on his initiative, his intelligence, his personal decisions, and that would be the freedom that we would want to have in this country. It's the ability to flourish and prosper based on our own efforts and to be able to experience the fruits of our own production. These different political systems have different ideas. It's like a race, a race, like a marathon, starts with everybody at the same starting line, and then they go, but the finish line has huge stragglers. There's some at the beginning, a whole bunch in the middle, and a whole bunch at the end. And many drop out along the way. Well, life's like that too. We all start out, we plop out, we're born. And then at the end, the whole spectrum of how well everybody's done. When I went to high school, there was like 900 kids in my high school. It was 300 per class. And they were all white. We had no African Americans. We had no Latinos. And it was a suburban, upper middle class. Everybody was basically started out with the same opportunity. You look at it 50 years later, some of them became drug addicts, some of them were dead, some of them were alcoholics. The vast majority were sort of in the middle class somewhere. A few did extremely well. And studies have shown even within a family, if there's 3 kids in a family, one will be a nightmare, one will be average, and one will be dynamic. So, anyway, that's one of the ways that you can create a sane society. Is you can evaluate friends and associates by statistics. What are your stats? No, I'm not talking about that. Like, how much survival are they surrounded with? What is the quality and condition of their life? That's the net reflection of all of their decisions. Cumulative effect of all the decisions you've made in life is how your life is. That's pretty simple. But you can't have a race where everybody starts at the same spot and everybody ends at the same spot. See, that's what equal outcome, that idea, which is, it's called equity. Equity replaced equality, that word. It's insidious because it means everybody ends up in the same place. It doesn't mean everybody has the same opportunity to prosper. It means everybody, if I make more than you, then you get some of what I have. The teacher in high school said he was going to do a socialism experiment. The students that got A's, they were going to get C's, and the ones that got F were going to get C's. And the students didn't like that idea, even though they kind of liked the idea of socialism. Oh yeah, take from the rich and give to the poor. But they didn't like their own wealth that they had created, their good grades. They didn't like that taken away and given to somebody who didn't study and didn't work. But anyway, it is what it is. So the definition of sanity is the ability to tolerate confusion and an agreed upon stable datum on which to align the confusion. So this ability to tolerate confusion, so important because that is the key to a sane reaction. It means that you don't react to it. It means that your TRs are in. What is the very first thing you ever do in Scientology? It's TRs, it's basics. If you can keep your TRs in, then, as Kipling said, you keep your head when everybody else is around you is losing theirs. Then you can be effective. You can actually bring things bring about order, you can bring about a sane solution. So how does one get to a point where you can do it? Well, any simple training will do. Auditor training, admin training, ethics training, it gives you a much better understanding of things so you don't react to it. You understand it more than react to it. I was talking to one of my PCs a few weeks ago when he'd been an auditor in the HTC, but he hadn't audited in several years. He says, you know, the best beingness I ever had was the beingness of an auditor. So it got me to thinking about that. I never thought about it quite like that before. I started to see what he meant. So an auditor is trained on how to handle bank without reacting to it. You're handling it all the time. You get used to it. You run into the same things in sessions you run into life. Negativity, counterintention, end theta, misemotion, and other case manifestations. A lot of these things can be handled with TRs alone. And you know, when you're meeting people socially, you can't audit them really, but you can acknowledge them. That goes a long way. But an auditor gets into the habit and routine of good TRs, good comm cycles, handling originations, acknowledgments. To an auditor, following the auditor's code is second nature. Ellery says that, you know, the auditor's code is a good code to follow in life as well as in session. I always like this one little part that was in one of the tech films about the auditor's code. And Ellery says that to sum up the auditor's code in 2 words is be kind. So people can interact with you when these points are in without getting stimulated by comm cycle errors or other kinds of, auditor's code errors. This fits right into the definition of sanity, a tolerance of confusion, TRs, and an agreed upon method of handling, auditor's code. Auditor training enables a person to easily apply the 2 rules for happy living. It's another really key point. Be willing to experience anything, TRs, and only create those effects that others can experience easily. Auditor's code. Ellery says that following the 2 rules for happy living keeps you out of the overt motivator sequence. The overt motivator sequence is one of the primary manifestations of the R6 bank. When you get stuck in an overt motivator sequence, it opens the door to all kinds of extreme dramatizations. Again, you see this all the time. So, the more trained you are, the more solution-oriented you are in life, the bigger your range of influences, and the more survival you can create and handle dramatizations without yourself becoming interpolated by them. So, in the end, the solutions to life are what they've always been all along from your very first course in Scientology, all the way up to OT, the basics. Auditor training, ethics training, admin training, increase your executive abilities. You become much more able to organize your life in a way where you're able to be successful in your own goals. You're able to create the wherewithal, the space and time to continue your education and your auditing, because it's an endless cycle. The people that I audit that do the best listen to tapes between sessions. They read between sessions. They bring things into the session that then they can find the basic on and increase their case game. And at the top of the list of importances is this progress on your own bridge. Because until you are free from the defects of the GP and bank, and the pitfalls and traps, you're not free. So all of this is available, and all of this is doable. You just have to do it. Thank you.